OSHA Recordkeeping. Introduction. Many safety professionals start their career in an administrative role maintaining the OSHA 300 and 300A forms, yet often they do not have the training or experience to capably perform this task. This video is designed to provide guidance on Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, 1904.7 General Recording Criteria, and 1904.5 Determination of Work-Relatedness, Part 1, OSHA 19.4.7 General Recording Criteria. Basic requirement. You must consider an injury or illness to meet the general recording criteria and therefore to be recordable if it results in any of the following: death, days away from work, restricted work or transfer to another job, medical treatment beyond first aid, or loss of consciousness. You must also consider a case to meet the general recording criteria if it involves a significant injury or illness diagnosed by a physician or other licensed healthcare professional, even if it does not result in death, days away from work, restricted work or job transfer, medical treatment beyond first aid, or loss of consciousness. How do I record a work-related injury or illness that results in the employee's death? You must record an injury or illness that results in death by entering a check mark on the OSHA 300 log in the space for cases resulting in death. You must also report any work-related fatality to OSHA within 8 hours. How do I record a work-related injury or illness that results in days away from work? When an injury or illness involves one or more days away from work, you must record the injury or illness on the OSHA 300 log, with a checkmark in the space for cases involving days away and an entry of the number of calendar days away from work in the number of days column. If the employee is out for an extended period of time, you must enter an estimate of the days that the employee will be away and update the day count when the actual number of days is known. Do I count the day on which the injury occurred or the illness began? No, you begin counting days away on the day after the injury occurred or the illness began. How do I record an injury or illness when a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends that the worker stay at home, but the employee comes to work anyway? You must record these injuries and illnesses on the OSHA 300 log, using the checkbox for cases with days away from work, and enter the number of calendar days away recommended by the physician or other licensed healthcare professional. If a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends days away, you should encourage your employee to follow that recommendation. However, the days away must be recorded whether the injured or ill employee follows the physician or licensed healthcare professional's recommendation or not. If you receive recommendations from 2 or more physicians or other licensed healthcare professionals, you may make a decision as to which recommendation is the most authoritative and record the case based upon that recommendation. How do I handle a case when a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends that the worker return to work, but the employee stays at home anyway? In this situation, you must end the count of days away from work on the date the physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends that the employee return to work. How do I count weekends, holidays, or other days the employee would not have worked anyway? You must count the number of calendar days the employee was unable to work as a result of the injury or illness, regardless of whether or not the employee was scheduled to work on those days. Weekend days, holidays, vacation days, or other days off are included in the total number of days recorded if the employee would not have been able to work on those days because of a work-related injury or illness. How do I record a case in which a worker is injured or becomes ill on a Friday and reports to work on a Monday and was not scheduled to work on the weekend? You need to record this case only if you receive information from a physician or other licensed healthcare professional indicating that the employee should not have worked or should have performed only restricted work during the weekend. If so, you must record the injury or illness as a case with days away from work or restricted work and enter the day counts as appropriate. How do I record a case in which a worker is injured or becomes ill on the day before scheduled time off, such as a holiday, a planned vacation, or a temporary plant closing? You need to record a case of this type only if you receive information from a physician or other licensed healthcare professional indicating that the employee should not have worked or should have performed only restricted work during the scheduled time off. If so, you must record the injury or illness as a case with days away from work or restricted work and enter the day counts as appropriate. Is there a limit to the number of days away from work I must count? Yes, you may cap the total days away at 180 calendar days. You are not required to keep track of the number of calendar days away from work if the injury or illness resulted in more than 180 calendar days away from work and/or days of job transfer or restriction. In such a case, entering 180 in the total days away column will be considered adequate. May I stop counting days if an employee who is away from work because of an injury or illness retires or leaves my company? Yes, if the employee leaves your company for some reason unrelated to the injury or illness, such as retirement, a plant closing, or to take another job, you may stop counting days away from work or days of restriction job transfer. If the employee leaves your company because of the injury or illness, you must estimate the total number of days away or days of restriction job transfer and enter the day count on the 300 log. If a case occurs in 1 year but results in days away during the next calendar year, do I record the case in both years? No, you only record the injury or illness once. You must enter the number of calendar days away for the injury or illness on the OSHA 300 log for the year in which the injury or illness occurred. If the employee is still away from work because of the injury or illness when you prepare the annual summary, estimate the total number of calendar days you expect the employee to be away from work. Use this number to calculate the total for the annual summary, and then update the initial log entry later when the day count is known or reaches the 180-day cap. How do I record a work-related injury or illness that results in restricted work or job transfer? When an injury or illness involves restricted work or job transfer but does not involve death or days away from work, you must record the injury or illness on the OSHA 300 log by placing a check mark in the space for job transfer or restriction and an entry of the number of restricted or transferred days in the restricted workdays column. You keep the employee from performing one or more of the routine functions of his or her job, or from working the full workday that he or she would otherwise have been scheduled to work, or a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends that the employee not perform one or more of the routine functions of his or her job, or not work the full workday that he or she would otherwise have been scheduled to work. Do I have to record restricted work or job transfer if it applies only to the day on which the injury occurred or the illness began? No, you do not have to record restricted work or job transfers if you, or the physician or other licensed healthcare professional, impose the restriction or transfer only for the day on which the injury occurred or the illness began. If you or a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends a work restriction, is the injury or illness automatically recordable as a restricted work case? No, a recommended work restriction is recordable only if it affects one or more of the employee's routine job functions. To determine whether this is the case, you must evaluate the restriction in light of the routine functions of the injured or ill employee's job. If the restriction from you or the physician or other licensed healthcare professional keeps the employee from performing one or more of his or her routine job functions, or from working the full workday the injured or ill employee would otherwise have worked, the employee's work has been restricted, and you must record the case. How do I record a case where the worker works only for a partial work shift because of a work-related injury or illness? A partial day of work is recorded as a day of job transfer or restriction for record-keeping purposes, except for the day on which the injury occurred or the illness began. If the injured or ill worker produces fewer goods or services than he or she would have produced prior to the injury or illness, but otherwise performs all of the routine functions of his or her work, is the case considered a restricted work case? No, the case is considered restricted work only if the worker does not perform all of the routine functions of his or her job, or does not work the full shift that he or she would otherwise have worked. How do I handle vague restrictions from a physician or other licensed healthcare professional, such as that the employee engage only in light duty or take it easy for a week? If you are not clear about the physician or other licensed healthcare professional's recommendation, you may ask that person whether the employee can do all of his or her routine job functions and work all of his or her normally assigned work shift. If the answer to both of these questions is yes, then the case does not involve a work restriction and does not have to be recorded as such. If the answer to one or both of these questions is no, the case involves restricted work and must be recorded as a restricted work case. If you are unable to obtain this additional information from the physician or other licensed healthcare professional who recommended the restriction, record the injury or illness as a case involving restricted work. What do I do if a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends a job restriction meeting OSHA's definition, but the employee does all of his or her routine job functions anyway? You must record the injury or illness on the OSHA 300 log as a restricted work case. If a physician or other licensed healthcare professional recommends a job restriction, you should ensure that the employee complies with that restriction. If you receive recommendations from 2 or more physicians or other licensed healthcare professionals, you may make a decision as to which recommendation is the most authoritative and record the case based upon that recommendation. How do I record an injury or illness that involves medical treatment beyond first aid? If a work-related injury or illness results in medical treatment beyond first aid, you must record it on the OSHA 300 log. If the injury or illness did not involve death, 1 or more days away from work, 1 or more days of restricted work, or 1 or more days of job transfer, you enter a check mark in the box for cases where the employee received medical treatment but remained at work and was not transferred or restricted. Medications available in both prescription and non-prescription form. A recommendation by a physician or other licensed healthcare professional to use a non-prescription medication at prescription strength is considered medical treatment for record-keeping purposes. Medical treatment means the management and care of a patient to combat disease or disorder. For the purposes of Part 1904, medical treatment does not include visits to a physician or other licensed healthcare professional solely for observation or counseling, the conduct of diagnostic procedures such as X-rays and blood tests, including the administration of prescription medications used solely for diagnostic purposes. Wound closing devices such as sutures, staples, or sterile liquid skin adhesive are considered medical treatment. Devices with rigid stays or other systems designed to immobilize parts of the body are considered medical treatment for record-keeping purposes. First aid, which is not recordable, means using a non-prescription medication at non-prescription strength, administering tetanus immunizations, cleaning, flushing, or soaking wounds on the surface of the skin, using wound coverings such as bandages, band-aids, TM, gauze pads, etc., removing splinters or foreign material from areas other than the eye by irrigation, tweezers, cotton swabs, or other simple means using butterfly bandages or steri strips, using hot or cold therapy, using any non-rigid means of support, such as elastic bandages, wraps, non-rigid back belts, etc., removing foreign bodies from the eye using only irrigation or a cotton swab, and using finger guards. Part 2, 1904-25 BB, the 2. Determination of work-relatedness exemptions. You are not required to record injuries and illnesses if, at the time of the injury or illness, the employee was present in the work environment as a member of the general public rather than as an employee. An example is someone works at a grocery store but is off work and there at the grocery store shopping. The injury or illness involves signs or symptoms that surface at work but result solely from a non-work-related event or exposure that occurs outside the work environment. Example is an employee getting a common cold or flu from a non-work source, and then reporting symptoms at work. The illness is not recordable, as it resulted solely from an outside exposure. The injury or illness results solely from voluntary participation in a wellness program or in a medical, fitness, or recreational activity such as blood donation, physical examination, flu shot, exercise class, racquetball, or baseball. The injury or illness is solely the result of an employee eating, drinking, or preparing food or drink for personal consumption, whether bought on the employer's premises or brought in. For example, if the employee is injured by choking on a sandwich while in the employer's establishment, the case would not be considered work-related. Note: if the employee is made ill by ingesting food contaminated by workplace contaminants, such as lead, or gets food poisoning from food supplied by the employer, the case would be considered work-related. The injury or illness is solely the result of an employee doing personal tasks, unrelated to their employment, at the establishment outside of the employee's assigned working hours. The injury or illness is solely the result of personal grooming, self-medication for a non-work-related condition, or is intentionally self-inflicted. Examples would be cutting finger while trimming fingernails while on break, becoming lightheaded and fainting after taking blood pressure medication, or becoming upset over a personal matter and punching a wall. Note, if the person becomes upset due to the work environment, such as punching the wall after being told they are being forced to work overtime, it is work-related. The injury or illness is caused by a motor vehicle accident and occurs on a company parking lot or company access road while the employee is commuting to or from work. The illness is the common cold or flu. Note, contagious diseases such as tuberculosis, brucellosis, hepatitis A, or plague are considered work-related if the employee is infected at work. The illness is a mental illness. Mental illness will not be considered work-related unless the employee voluntarily provides the employer with an opinion from a physician or other licensed healthcare professional with appropriate training and experience, psychiatrist, psychologist, psychiatric nurse practitioner, etc., stating that the employee has a mental illness that is work-related. For additional information, refer to OSHA 1904.5 and OSHA 1904.7. Before making any decision based on this training, review the relevant OSHA letters of interpretation.